Chapter 5. Implementing the Plan Response. Our objectives. Describe how to notify the proper authorities and request additional resources. Describe scene control procedures using control zones. Describe protective actions, evacuation, and shelter in place. The operations level objectives. Describe the procedures for requesting additional resources. Describe the scene control procedures using control zones. Describe appropriate locations for the incident command post. And describe appropriate locations for control zones. Describe effective, coordinated communication techniques. Describe evidence preservation. Describe the role of the operations level responder, the incident safety officer, and a hazardous material branch or group at a hazardous material incident. Describe the role of other agencies that respond to a hazardous material incident. Describe the levels of hazardous material incidences. Describe the incident command system. Describe the importance of the buddy system and backup personnel. And describe protective actions during search and rescue, evacuation, and shelter in place. Describe the safety precautions to be observed, including safety briefings, as well as physical capability requirements, including those for heat and cold stress when approaching or working in a hazardous material environment. Describe evaluation and communication of the status of the response. Scene control is especially important at a hazardous material incident. Size up, which is the rapid mental process of evaluating critical visual indicators at the incident, processing that information based on your training and experience, and arriving at a conclusion to form and implement a plan of action. Plans sometimes include aggressive offensive posture, in other cases a defensive posture. The initial steps should be safety, isolate, and notify, which can be abbreviated as SIN. Safety. Ensure your own safety by staying upwind and uphill out of the problem. Obtain a briefing from those involved in the incident. Understand the nature of the problem and factors influencing the release. And attempt to make a positive identification of the released substance. Isolate. Isolate and deny entry to the scene. Recognize that your first priority is to separate the people from the problem. Establish a command post in a particular area with access to communication. And determine your response objectives, choose a strategy, and formulate an incident action plan. Be sure to notify. Decide if you need to notify anyone else, such as other responders, law enforcement agencies, or technical experts. Responders should consult the ERG for guidance on protective actions or as a starting point for gathering information about a released substance. Control zones are established at a hazardous material incident based on the chemical and physical properties of the released material, environmental factors at the time of the release, and the general layout of the scene. If the incident is inside a structure, the best place to control access at the normal points of ingress and egress doors. As the incident commander gets more information, the control zones may be changed, such as wind shifts can modify control zones during an incident. Hot zone, also called the exclusionary zone. This is the area immediately surrounding the release. This is the most contaminated area. All personnel must wear complete and appropriate protective clothing and equipment. Boundaries should be set so that adverse effects from the least substance will not affect people outside the hot zone. Access must be limited to only those persons necessary to control the incident. All personnel and equipment must be decontaminated when they leave the hot zone. Warm zone, also called contamination reduction zone. This is where personnel and equipment transition in and out of the hot zone. This contains control points for access to the hot zone as well as the decontamination corridor. Personnel can use PPE whose protection is rated one level lower than that of the PPE used in the hot zone. Cold zone, also called the outer perimeter. This is a safe area where personnel do not need to wear protective clothing. In this area, you will have staging, the command post, EMS providers, and the area for medical monitoring and treatment after decontamination. Performing emergency decontamination. This is the process of getting the bulk of the contaminant off a person as quickly and completely as possible in order to limit or reduce adverse health effects. Follow these steps for emergency decon. Ensure first that you have the appropriate PPE. Stay clear of the product and avoid physical contact. Direct the victims out of a hazard zone if possible to contain the runoff. Instruct the victim in removing contaminated clothing. Rinse the victim with copious amounts of water. And provide or obtain medical treatment for the victim and arrange for victim transport. The buddy system and backup personnel. Operating alone at a hazardous material incident should never be allowed. The buddy system, which is a rule that no fewer than 2 responders may enter a contaminated area. The backup team, the backup personnel wearing the same level of protection as the initial entry team. Both are required by OSHA and HAZWOP regulations. A backup team could be called upon to remove individuals working in the hot zone if an emergency occurs and they cannot escape on their own. A backup team should never be more than a minute or so from being fully dressed and ready for action. Factors to consider during an evacuation. What is the nature and duration of the release? Age, underlying health status, and mobility of the evacuees. The ability to support evacuees with basic services. Also, you have to think about transportation challenges. Schools, fairgrounds, and sports arenas can be used as shelters. Initial evacuation distances may be derived from the ERG, though the ERG does not give complete and detailed information for all conditions. The incident commander should use detection and monitoring devices to identify areas of airborne contamination. Shelter in place. Keeping people in an enclosed atmosphere, usually inside a structure. Residents should remain indoors with windows and doors closed and the ventilation system turned off. This approach may be used for short-term events or transient vapor clouds. Search and rescue. Emergency response personnel must first recognize and identify released substances and understand the hazards before searching and rescuing. If searches can be safely performed, rescue teams should be wearing proper personal protective equipment and then they can enter the hot zone looking for victims. Victims are moved first to the warm zone where they are decontaminated and turned over to EMS providers. Safety briefing. Written site safety plans and verbal safety briefings before actions are taken. This is done to inform all responders of the health hazards that are known or anticipated, incident objectives, as well as emergency medical procedures, radio frequencies, and emergency signals, as well as description of the site and the PPE that should be worn. The IC may establish predetermined trigger points to evaluate the status of the planned response. The IC may later decide to abandon current plan of action and withdraw to a safe distance, set defensive perimeters, and wait for additional resources. Incident communications. You should have command and tactical channels. Entry teams to communicate on a dedicated radio channel. Briefings may also include procedures for operating at a crime scene or evidence collection procedures. Written safety plans should include information about heat or cold stress. Excessive heat disorders. First, heat exhaustion, which is a mild form of shock. The circulatory system begins to fail because the body becomes overheated. Signs and symptoms include dizziness, blurred vision, acute fatigue, headache, and muscle cramps. Personnel should be removed from the environment immediately, rehydrated with electrolyte solutions, and kept cool. Do not pour cold water on a victim or place the victim in a cold environment. Use tepid water for drinking and for cooling the skin first. Heat stroke can be severe and potentially fatal. The failure of temperature regulatory capacity of the body. Early symptoms are reduction or sensation of sweating. Other symptoms include body temperature of 105 or more, a rapid pulse, hot red looking skin, headache, confusion, unconsciousness, and even possibly seizures. This requires immediate transport to a medical facility. Cold temperature exposure. This is caused by operating environments where air temperatures or other weather conditions or hazardous materials such as liquefied gas or cryogenic liquids. It is important to remember that wet clothing extracts heat from the body as much as 240 times faster than dry clothing. This can lead to hypothermia. This is when the core body temperature falls below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Personnel should wear layered clothing and be able to warm themselves in a heated shelter or vehicle. Personal protective equipment, physical capability requirements. Pre-entry health screenings before wearing chemical protective equipment. Check of vital signs, body weight measurements, and general health. This should be similar post-entry evaluations after decon should be done. ICS was initially established by the Fire Resources of Southern California, organized for potential emergencies, known as Fire Scope. And this command system revolves around 4 key factors. That is common technology, consist of an organized structure, position and titles, and common incident facilities. Command. This is established when the first unit arrives on scene and maintained until the last unit leaves. Command can be unified command, or it can be a singular event. But unified command is when multiple agencies with overlapping jurisdiction or legal responsibilities are involved in the same incident. Representation from various agencies cooperate to share command authority. Incident Command Post. This is where the IC, that is the person that is in charge of the entire incident, is located. This is also where coordination, control, and communications are centralized. Now, command will have a, quote, command staff, and this is made up of several different members. First is the safety officer, which is responsible for the safety of the hazardous material teams only. Liaison officer. This is the point of contact for cooperating and assisting agencies on the scene. And public information officer. This is the point of contact for media and other entities seeking information about the incident. When the incident is too large or complex for just the incident commander to manage, the IC may assign others to oversee parts of the incident. So you may have an operation section. This is led by an operations section chief. They carry out the objectives developed by the IC and is responsible for the tactical operations. This is usually assigned when complex instances involve more than 20 single resources or when the IC cannot be involved in all details of the tactical operation. Hazardous Material Group, established when companies and crews work in the same task objectives but are not necessarily in the same location. So essentially your operations section is your worker bees. It's head up by an operations chief that reports to the incident commander. However, it is up to the operations chief to dictate and plan out how they're going to carry out or what they're actually going to do to meet the objectives set by the incident command. Planning section. This is led by the planning section chief. The planning section will collect all information on the situation, such as statuses of units, track logs, and resources, and disseminate all written incident action plans. Logistics. The logistics section is overseen by the logistics section chief, and they are tasked with providing facilities and services to the individuals working the incident, such as food, sanitation, things of that nature. So their focus is supporting the incident itself, not per se individuals that are patients, if you will say. Now, if these are going to be long incidences that span several days, you're probably going to need to get a finance and administrative section going. And these are the individuals that essentially track costs and ensure records are kept and bills are paid and things of that nature. Summary. The acronym SIN, which stands for Safety, Isolate, Notify, is a good place to start when undertaking a hazardous material response. The awareness level responders should ensure scene safety by setting up a barrier around the scene to keep out bystanders and those who are not properly trained or outfitted to engage in the response. The 3 levels of control zones around a hazardous material incident are the cold zone, warm zone, and hot zone. The hot zone is the most contaminated and the cold zone is the safest. At the scene of a hazardous material incident, OSHA requires the use of the buddy system. A risk-based method of decision-making should be employed before people are told to engage in sheltering in place or to evacuate from the scene of a hazardous material incident. A safety briefing informs all responders about the health and hazards that are known or anticipated at the hazardous material incident. It is essential for responders to be aware of the signs and symptoms of excessive heat exposure, such as heat exhaustion, heat stroke, heat stress, and dehydration. Becoming familiar with the cooling techniques used by your jurisdiction and your own physical capabilities and requirements. Two types of cold temperature exposures are possible. Those are caused by the release of a material and those that are caused by the operating environment. The incident command system has many benefits, including the use of common terminology, consistent organizational structure, and position titles, as well as common incident facilities. The ICS can be expanded to handle an incident of any size and complexity. The ICS incorporates 5 main functions: command, operations, planning, logistics, and finance/administration. The incident commander is the person in charge of the incident site. He or she is responsible for all decisions related to the management of the incident. The command staff consists of safety officer, liaison officer, and public information officer. Groups and divisions are established to aggregate single resources and or crews under one supervisor. A hazardous material branch consists of some of the following staff as needed: a hazardous material safety officer, an entry team, a decontamination team, a backup entry team, and a technical reference team. The operation level responders to a hazardous material incident for the purpose of implementing or supporting actions to protect nearby person, the environment, or property from the effects of the release.